Welcome back to The Explainer. Now, we've already covered the how of the clinical supply chain, the basic steps. But today, we're going a level deeper. We're talking about the why. What's it actually like to manage a product that isn't even approved yet? A world where every single decision is a high-stakes trade-off. That's what we're getting into today.
All right, so when you hear supply chain, your mind probably jumps to logistics. Trucks, warehouses, boxes. And yeah, of course, that's a part of it. But the real challenge, the really fascinating part of this story, it's somewhere else entirely.
Because what if it's actually about making these impossible choices under extreme uncertainty? It's a story of judgment calls, tough trade-offs, and these high-stakes decisions where, honestly, there are no easy answers. So how on earth do you manage a system like that? Okay, let's break it down.
Okay, here's what we're going to cover. We'll start with the product itself, this thing called an IMP, and why its special status just changes everything. From there, we'll look at how the supply chain has to evolve, figure out who's really in control, and then get into the nitty-gritty of how plans are managed, especially when they inevitably meet reality.
All right, first up, we have to start with the absolute heart of this whole thing, the star of the show, the investigational medicinal product. You'll hear it called the IMP.
So, what is an IMP? It's not just a new drug. It's a product that hasn't been approved for general use yet. It's literally still being tested. And that legal status, the fact that it's under investigation, well, that's what makes every single step of managing it so incredibly demanding.
And this is a really key point. IMP isn't some scientific label, it's a legal one. And here's where it gets wild. That label also applies to the placebo. That means a simple sugar pill, a pill with no active ingredient, has to be manufactured, labeled, stored, and tracked with the exact same level of insane scrutiny as the brand new, potentially life-saving drug. Every single pack has to be accounted for, from the factory to the patient and all the way back.
Okay, so next up, the supply chain itself isn't a static thing. It's not like you design it once and you're done. No way. It has to completely transform, and pretty dramatically, as the trial itself moves through different phases. You see, each phase of clinical development is asking a totally different question. Phase 1 is just about safety. Phase 2, does it work? Phase 3, how well does it work? And as you move through these, the supply chain requirements just explode. I mean, look at the leap from Phase 1 to Phase 3. You go from managing supply for maybe 100 volunteers at 1 or 2 sites to coordinating a global operation for thousands of patients across dozens of countries. The complexity is just off the charts. In this right here, this table really captures the fundamental mindset shift you need to have. Think about a normal commercial supply chain. Its goal is stability, predictability, cost optimization. You've got forecastable data. But the clinical supply chain? Its goal is flexibility. Patient first always. Demand is totally unpredictable because you don't know how fast patients will enroll. The process has to adapt to constant change. So trying to apply that stable, cost-focused commercial logic here, it's not just inefficient, it's a recipe for putting patients at massive risk.
So, if the stakes are this high and everything is this complicated, you have to ask, who's actually in control? Who is making the final call? Well, that brings us to governance. Let's take a look.
It all starts here, the sponsor. That's the company that owns the drug, whether it's a pharma giant like Pfizer or a tiny biotech startup. Legally, they own everything. They are 100% responsible for everything that happens in that trial. The buck stops with them.
But, and this is the big paradox, the sponsor almost never controls any of this directly. Manufacturing, outsourced. Logistics, outsourced. The day-to-day trial operations, also outsourced to specialist vendors. So this creates a fundamental problem. How can you be completely accountable for a supply chain that you don't actually physically control? The answer? It's governance. See, the sponsor works with all these partners. There are CROs, or contract research organizations, that run the trial, and CMOs, contract manufacturing organizations, that make the drug. Now, you can outsource the execution, but you can never, ever outsource the accountability. And that's why these governance forums exist. They're not just weekly check-in calls. These are the decision-making bodies where the sponsor stays in control, reviews all the risks, and gives the final approval on any changes. Okay, so this whole thing is definitely not a set it and forget it kind of project. You can't just make a plan and hope for the best. The clinical supply chain is a living, breathing system, and it requires constant, hands-on management. And that management happens through what's called an operating rhythm. Think of it like a constant pulse of oversight.
On a continuous basis, you've got automated systems monitoring inventory and triggering resupply orders. Then, every week, the ops teams are in the weeds, reviewing shipments and solving immediate problems. Monthly, the forecasts get updated against actual patient numbers. And quarterly, senior leadership steps in to review the big picture, the strategy, the budget, the major risks. It's this cadence that keeps the plan tethered to reality and stops small issues from becoming huge patient risks.
So that's the theory, but what does this management actually look like day to day? What kinds of decisions are leaders really making, especially when, things inevitably go wrong? And this is the crucial part. Management here is really all about making tough judgment calls on these unavoidable trade-offs. For instance, how much extra drug should we make? If you make too little, you risk running out and halting the trial. Too much, and you've wasted millions on a drug that might not even work. Or when do you hit pause on enrolling new patients just to protect the supply for the ones already in the trial? What about a shipment that got too warm? Is it safe, or does it have to be destroyed? These decisions don't have a simple right or wrong answer in a textbook. They're all a delicate balancing act between patient safety, cost, and speed.
All right, let's make this real. Let's walk through a crisis scenario that I guarantee you every single supply chain professional in this industry has faced at some point. A shipment of temperature-sensitive drug is headed to 3 different trial sites. It gets held up in customs and the temperature goes out of range. Meanwhile, patients are scheduled for their visits next week. What do you do? So what happens next isn't panic. The chaos of the problem is met with a very calm, very structured response. The focus isn't on finding someone to blame, it's on following the process. First, you quarantine the shipment immediately. You open a formal investigation with your logistics partner. At the same time, you're pulling stability data to see if the drug is even still viable. And you're already mitigating the risk by finding backup stock at the nearest depot to get it rerouted. And throughout all of this, you are constantly communicating with the sites, letting them know about the potential delay. See? This is what great management looks like. It's about having these processes in place before the crisis ever hits.
So, with all of this complexity, with data flying around everywhere, you can't just look at a simple dashboard with a few green and red lights. It's not that simple. So what do the really experienced leaders, the pros, actually keep their eyes on?
Well, they watch for signals, not just metrics. There's a big difference. Take stockout risk, for example. The data you need to really understand that risk is spread across multiple, disconnected systems. The inventory system, the depot system, the site system. You can't just run a single report. Or think about patient continuity. If a patient misses a dose, that's a huge deal. But that information is often reported in a totally separate clinical system, not a supply chain one. So leaders have to become detectives, piecing together this puzzle from all these different sources to see the true picture of what's going on.
And that really brings us to the ultimate takeaway here. At the end of the day, success in this environment comes down to the human element. It's about the skill of individual leaders to read incomplete, messy information and make those critical judgments under immense pressure.
So the real question isn't how do we build a perfect plan? Because a perfect plan doesn't exist. The real question is, how do we build a system and a team that not only survives, but actually thrives on uncertainty? It's a huge shift in thinking, right? Away from just executing a static plan and towards actively managing a dynamic, unpredictable system. And that's the challenge that truly defines the modern clinical supply chain.